Good afternoon. We are starting off our panel, the 3:15 session, titled Debating the Use of Offsetting to Govern Land Use Transitions. My name is Ritwick Ghosh. I am one of the panel organizers with Pooja, Choksi. She and I will coordinate the protocols here. The first presenter today, and before I begin, feel free to come forward because this is a very large room. We can make it more intimate if people come forward and don't feel pressure to sit back. So the first presenter today is Camilla Moioli. She's from the University of British Columbia. She's presenting on regional forests, global climate change, carbon offsetting, and mitigation deterrence in an unequal world. Go ahead.
Hello. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Camilla Moioli. I'm from the University of British Columbia, Faculty of Forestry. And today with this brief presentation, I will try to highlight some equity concern related to the use of forest carbon offset as a mitigation strategy for climate change. Just to give a brief introduction, we might all know that to reach the 2-degree climate target, we might need to rely to carbon dioxide removal technology because our effort in direct mitigation at source of the energy sector has not been very important until now, so we might need some other ways to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. Between all this technology, one that is gaining popularities are for sure the forest interventions such as afforestation, reforestation, and RED. This is because they are much cheaper compared to other type of technologies such as DAC or BECS, and also because the mechanism through which they work is easily understandable even from a very not technical audience, and so they are used also from policymakers and industry to show themselves as environmental friendly. Throughout this presentation, I will refer to all the additional negative emission deriving from this project as FCO, even if we don't always model the carbon trade. Even we do for one piece, but not always. But I will always refer to them as FCO. Despite the popularity that these forest initiatives are gaining around the world, they still have many challenges. One of them is called mitigation deterrence, and it relates to the mechanism through which we, or companies, countries, energy sector in particular, instead of try to change their system and their technology to really reduce emission at source, they rely on offset. This is an issue that can be related to all CDR really, but it's mostly, it's even more important for forest and forest carbon offset because they are indeed much cheaper, and so they are very attractive on the market. A second challenge could be the permanence of carbon sink. When we rely on forest to store carbon, we need to take into account that most likely it will not be forever. Forests are indeed subject to many risks, can be natural risks such as wildfire, we have been seeing many in the last years around the world, or pests, but also human disturbances. So when we plant trees around the world or when we implement this type of project, we need to always keep in mind that the land we use is not, in most cases, not bare land, but it's land used by local people and local communities to drive their livelihood. And so, if they're not offered with the right incentive, the right inclusion in the project, and also the right alternative, they might reuse the forest and decrease the carbon stock. We also have the challenge with overestimation, meaning that we rely on many land model to guess, to forecast how much land is available around the world for this project, and also how much carbon this new forest or this not cutted forest can store. However, we can have many flaws and many errors. related to monitoring, enforcing of this project, but even just in the accounting of the carbon stored in this forest, and also we can be wrong about the additionality assumption, so we can make errors in the estimation of the baseline. And finally, again related with equity, because most of these FCO are produced in non-OECD countries, because of course it's cheaper there, but they are most often used by OECD countries, high-income countries, or even big multinational company to offset this emission. We can see actually a transfer of carbon budget, and so like we can move negative emission from country that historically emitted much less to country that emitted much more, creating like equity concern again. This is even more important if we think that we'd like to rely on this forest project on a large scale, and so we hope to offset a lot of emission through forest carbon offset. And also, if we consider that we live in an integrated system, what does that mean? This means that our decision today about mitigation and energy transition highly rely on our expectation about our future ability of mitigation, of managing carbon fluxes. So if we expect our ability to be inflated compared to the actual ability we have, we can take today the wrong decision and can be even more costly in the future to come back and change our strategies. Based on that, I developed like two main works. The first one is about is with a global climate target, and the second one is with a regional climate target. In the first case, we calculate the global carbon budget that will imply reaching a 2-degree target for temperature rise, while the second one, we actually rely on the NDC coming out from the Glasgow meeting, and we have regional carbon budget. With the first one, we really want to see the role of FCO in mitigating, in a mitigation strategy. We want to see where the FCO come from, how they change the mitigation cost, how they impact the energy transition in different regions, OECD versus non-OECD, and the cost of failure of this FCO. While with the second one, we will try to include the trade, and we want to see how the quantity of FCO is different under different trade constraints. Again, we will look at the mitigation cost. We will also be interested in spillover effect and, again, the carbon budget distribution. For this presentation, we will focus on the 2 points, on the first 2 points for each model, just because they are comparable. The second one is very much still a work in progress, so I don't have much analysis on the second one, while the first one is a done work, so we can work on this too. So how do I do that? I do that relying on an integrated assessment model called WICH model. Has been developed by the European Institute for Economic and Environment based in Milan. We model the entire society. We have the economy, the energy, the land use, and the environment. They all interact with each other. Of particular interest for me was that energy decision and investment were endogenous in the system, and they are subject to learning curves, so really the expectation enter, and we can really leverage this type of modeling. I will be happy to discuss the model more in the Q&A session if you have any question about it. But let's try to see some results. So who is producing this forest carbon offset? These are the results from the global target model. On the left-hand side, we have the cumulative FCO throughout the century for non-OECD and OECD, while on the right-hand side, we have the per capita ones. We can see that in both cases, the non-OECD are the ones that produce most of the FCO. However, like the difference between these two is much smaller if we look at the per capita value compared to the cumulative absolute value. This second slide is about the second model, and of particular interest. No, so okay, we have a free model here. We have the 0% FCO with no trade, and these are 0% and 100% FCO with trade. So here the main point I want you to focus is the difference in the quantity of FCO produced under the non-trade and the trade scenario. So why we have the same level of offset for the 0% and 100% is because how we model the use of FCO. So we do not constrain the model in the sense that we don't allow the decision of reforestation or RED, because of course we can still do that. We simply constrain the model in such a way that we are not able to use the negative emission to offset the energy's emission, basically. So when we see 0% we trade, these are like virtual emission that would then be used in the other scenario. But interesting is like how much we trade, especially in the non-OECD, the quantity of FCO increased sharply. This might be due to an increase in carbon price when we allow for trade, and non-OECD could see an advantage of creating more FCO to then be traded on the carbon market. Interestingly enough, we see the same trend in OECD country. I still need more analysis to understand why is this happening, but the change is much less. And again, both in the cumulative and in the per capita, non-OECD country produce the most of FCO. Let's now have a look at the mitigation cost. So to understand the mitigation cost, what I did was comparing the GDP in the business as usual scenario against the GDP under climate policy constraint. More about the use of GDP in the Q&A. I'm not a big fan, but you know, it's a measure that we have. So very quickly, in this case, we have these two scenarios. If we look at the GDP as a percentage loss of business as usual, we can see that non-OECD are the one with the highest cost and the one that gain the most, both from the inclusion of FCO, so difference there, and both from the inclusion of the trade, so difference between brown bar and yellow bar. However, if instead of looking at the cumulative GDP percentage loss, we look at the per capita loss. In this case, we can see that OECD has the highest cost of mitigation. However, they also have the best cost saving when we include the FCO compared to not including them, but also they have a huge gain from trade. And that's, I think, it's a very important result. I will skip the step forward and I will just briefly summarize the take-home messages. So we definitely know that non-OECD countries are the main producer of FCO. With the global target, these FCO are mostly used by OECD, and I can talk more about that, about also the energy transition. We can see that both FCO and trade actually decrease the cost of mitigation. However, to decide if they decrease more or less in OECD versus non-OECD, we need to pick it. This result is sensitive to the matrix we use, and I think the matrix we use is more like a normative choice in our case. So like, do we feel more confident using a percentage loss or a per capita loss? Personally, I'll go with the per capita, but big discussion here on which one to use. And finally, more analysis will be needed here, but like regional target might change the result completely or might reinforce and increase the difference, but keeping the same trend as the global carbon budget. So thank you everyone for listening, and if you have any question, I'll be happy to get them.
It's a long way. Hi. Okay, works. Thanks for the presentation. You talked about mitigation costs in terms of GDP. Did you have the chance to also test on other costs of mitigation in terms of food price effects, for example, especially in non-OECD countries, that might also be, in the end, costs related to the actions taken?
So no, for the first work, what we did was looking at the GDP loss and at the actual carbon budget realized from the policy. And so we see the difference, obviously, in carbon price. Carbon price increase a lot if we don't allow for FCO. However, that was all we looked. That was mostly it. For the second paper, where we have like actual regional differentiation with regional climate target, we will try to do a better analysis, a more specific analysis about the cost, and try to find different ways to evaluate that.
great presentation. My question for you is, when you look at the cost of mitigation, is there a case for looking at the co-benefits, like the social cost of carbon as well, to compare if that kind of reduces the cost for mitigation? Like when you include the cost of social cost of carbon.
So the social cost of carbon is somehow included in the model, because like we model the environmental piece of society with a damage function. So an increase in environmental damage will be included in the business as usual scenario, and like improvement of climate damage will be also like included in the policy scenario. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have our next speaker, which is me. So good afternoon again. My name is Ritwick Ghosh, and I will be talking about how the idea of offsetting has evolved. And when I talk about, and you'll be wondering, how does offsetting evolve? It's not a species. I'm really talking about institution, the institution of offsetting. And when we talk about institutions in kind of economics and heterodox economics or political economy, we talk about the structure of state, market. Where is the... We talk about the government, the state, the market, and the community. Now, we often, some of you might have heard this language in the last 10, 20 years that we're moving towards more market-based approaches. So let me unpack what that means when it comes to offsetting. What is it, a market-based approach? And in a market, any kind of market transaction, you have at least two things happening. You have a demand and you have a supply. So if we unpack the idea of offsetting in terms of demand and supply, you have somebody who's going to be demanding the offset and somebody who's supplying the offset. Perhaps the most popular mechanism when we think about offsetting globally around forests and carbon is the idea of RED. When we think about RED, let me just take a step back. Oops. Okay, so when we think about demand, say, it could be voluntary, much like, you voluntarily pay anything to a charity, or you are forced to pay tax to the government. Those are two ways that you provide money towards the government and towards public services. Similarly, the supply, those who provide the offsets in terms of a credit, for example, would be either doing it because they are an NGO or is there a public entity, or perhaps they're doing it for money, so they are a for-profit or a market-based. So let's take the first example, like I was saying, the idea of RED. I think RED fits into this category here because money comes into the program voluntarily, and a lot of the money that's in the RED Plus program actually goes to non-profit organizations who put some kind of afforestation activities on the ground. So in that sense, it's not quite a market-based approach. But let me ask you guys, what would happen to this one where Microsoft, which is a for-profit company, buys 8 million carbon credits from BTG Pascal, and BTG Pascal is a large timber company. Stefano's nodding his head. And they were selling carbon for credits for a price. So where do you think this would fit? Microsoft, yeah, you want to say something? So it is for profit for the seller. BTG is doing it for money, but Microsoft doesn't have anything to gain from buying carbon credits because they are not forced to do it. So they are doing it voluntarily, much like sometimes Tesla or some of these other big tech companies do it. So rightfully, I think we put this in the category of a voluntary market. Let me check with you for this one. So some of you may have heard in the Californian carbon market, you are allowed as an emitter who's over their emission allocations to offset some of their credits. I think you're allowed to do 7 or 9% of your emissions to be offset. And that, it goes to some kind of private actor, most likely in California, whose selling has been verified to sell a credit. Where do I put that in? Who wants to give an answer to that? Yeah, Ghosh. Sorry, say that again? Compliance for profit. Right. So it is a compliance market. The person who's putting the money is doing it because they're forced to do it. And the person who's getting the money is doing it because they're trying to make some bucks out of it, right? The one I'm going to talk a little more to you is India's offsetting program, which is basically where the companies who do land use changes or they cut trees are required to pay the state some amount of money for the trees they cut. And that money is then used by the public sector, which is a non-profit entity, in putting afforestation activities on the ground. Often when you hear about the voluntary carbon market, you start thinking about the credits, you start thinking about the verifiers. A lot of you may have heard about the concerns around zombie credits and the lack of accountability. That looks very different when the public sector is putting the money on the ground. So effectively, it's operating like a tax on deforestation that then goes to support afforestation activities. And just to give you a sense of scale, this is the voluntary carbon market from the ecosystem marketplaces data, which is from 2024, and 2023 was surprisingly low, but the total accumulated money in the voluntary carbon market globally is about $10.8 billion, which actually is not a lot of money if you think about it, but we celebrate that as a big feat. But let me compare that to you, how much the accumulated money is India's compensatory afforestation program is about $7 billion. So what I want to highlight with this first point is that compliance and forcing people to pay for their environmental harms is a much more effective way of creating the funds to support environmental conservation and forestry activities, as opposed to waiting for voluntariness to click. And you can see that voluntariness can also go up and down with swings in the market and the economy. So, first point, think about the government as an important actor. So, once the government gets this money, what does it do? And this becomes really a big question of scale. And true to the question of scale, let me start from the top level questions and then get down to the bottom level questions. So, first is a question of where do you site the projects? Second is a question of how do you site the project? What do you plant? Who's going to do this afforestation work? And the third is a question of effectiveness and monitoring. What do we do with all this planting work? Is it really providing any sustained benefits? How do we account for this? So I'm going to quickly go through this and show you some of my conclusion. This just to give you a hint of what this research is based on. It's ethnographic qualitative research that I've been doing in India. A lot of interviews with high-level bureaucrats in India as well as street-level bureaucrats, those who are working at the ground level, and many people in between and non-state actors. I do a lot of document analysis, observation of following the officials as they go around organizing tree planting projects, and a few case studies. So where do you site projects? So just to run through this very quickly, the biggest tension in a country like India, which has a very small population, so you don't have to, the land is plentifully available, is a question of where do you site the projects. And as you start thinking, if you were a bureaucrat and you had to do this and you had to get this done quickly, my hypothesis going into this was that you choose the sites where you expect the least amount of political resistance, which eventually becomes communities who kind of Jim Scott-like version is like the civil society, the community is too prostrate to rebel. So my work was trying to understand places where people were pushing back against the siting of the projects. And India, this comes in direct tension with something called the Forest Rights Act, which actually gives communities a right over the forests that they live around. So here is somebody who's trying to put together this. The forests you see behind, this is in the state of Madhya Pradesh, have all been assigned as compensatory afforestation, and the community doesn't have access to these forests anymore. And he is trying to put together a claim that we live and work and live through these forests, so we should have claim to these forests. This is pending as far as the last I checked. Here is another example, and that's me in the middle in a forest plantation. And just to highlight here, the forest bureaucracy at the ground level in India operates almost like a police service. So they wear uniforms here. And this on the right they called it a Adivasi parliament, a tribal parliament on Independence Day, they were getting together to submit a claim to the government of India saying that, hey, please consider our interests when you set up these plantations so that we have access to them or we have a say in what's getting planted. So, oops. Next is a question of how do you plant? And as is with any bureaucracy, there is a lot of protocol. So here you have a national level organizing board, you have state level boards with various bodies, steering body, executive body. You have non-profit actors who do some auditing. You have the parliament itself and the accountability bodies of the parliament, which are checking on the executive bodies. Then this also goes down to the state legislature. And India is kind of interesting because forests are under the governance of the central government, but land is under the government of the regional state government. So you make what happens to forest lands because they're also kind of confused what to do with that. So just to quickly run through it, there are 3 stages that the government organizes this in: advanced work, planting, and then maintenance. And what I would just highlight is that there's a lot of pushback in what to plant. So there is a move towards indigenous crops, indigenous varieties. So that sounds nice, but when you're doing it at this national level scale, and there's some $2 billion that are being circulated through the program every year, you need to have that many trees at advanced work, which is in sapling stage. So where do you get that many saplings of indigenous plants? So that's a constraining factor. And they tend to rely on one of the monoculture agriculture, forestry products, plants that they have at hand. So this is why I'm pointing this out is that the structure leans the program into taking a more monoculture approach to plantation rather than a restorative approach. Just to give you more, this is a nursery where they're doing sal plant, preparing sal, which is a native tree variety this is in West Bengal, in Odisha, West Bengal, in this part of India. And it's very difficult to actually grow in a nursery. And it takes 2 whole years to grow this in the nursery. And in an arid country like India, where rain really comes only in one season, the monsoons, you have to really plan everything around the monsoons and plant just before the monsoons happen. Here is plantation activities. This is what it kind of looks like. They dig these pits in these areas, and then they all supposed to be structured in a specific number of trees and a specific number of acreage, because the budgeting works according to that. And this is what a plantation looks like. Here they're doing what they call intercropping, where they're planting in between these trees. I'm not sure this looks like a forest to begin with. It's very much a plantation with straight cut trees. But okay, we can call it that. Maintenance work is a big cost of the program as well. So my main things are putting up fences like here to prevent grazing activities and wild animals from eating these saplings, and also preparing and weeding and supplying some water. Effectiveness, now I won't go into this in a great deal. What I want to highlight is that the state, the government, like in any kind of a government entity, constructs a lot of documents around this project. This is, for example, in West Bengal, where each plantation site is numbered here, and every row you have the areas here, and then you have something called SP, which is the survival rates. And you can see some of them are 90%, some of them are 98%. That's very high. I don't know how they're getting to that level, but most of them actually don't survive. And so you have various audits that happen, non-governmental actors, and nothing much comes out of it. I think there's a lot of auditing and paperwork, but not a lot changes on the ground. The last point about the evolution is that the project has now become central to India's climate ambitions, where because there's so much money in the program that's supporting afforestation, the government now pitches this as its main mechanism to meet the climate agreement. And the climate agreement, in the Paris Climate Agreement, India made a commitment to sequester 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. That is higher than any other country. And the land gap report puts it at 55% of India's land would need to be under forestry. So what I want to say is that there's a lot of symbolism here. There's a lot of commitments to doing a lot of plantations. And if you're familiar, there's the Madhya Pradesh government at one point said we're going to plant 66 million trees in one day. Why they had to do it in one day? This is the former captain of the Indian cricket team planting a tree. This is, in cricket is a big symbolic factor in India. I'm going to skip through that. So just final thoughts. One is that different institutional forms for offsetting will require different governing mechanisms. So we can't expect focus only on the VERAs and the gold standards and think about that and issues of additionality and verification. We also need to look at what the state can do. There is some positive outcomes. Some of these are actual plantations with thriving ecosystems. But given the scale of the expectations, 2.5 to 3 billion through afforestation, 55% of the land, I think what is happening is much more symbolism than substantive, and we should think about what that means in an analytical way. And lastly, we need to understand what is happening on the ground with these programs. How are they coordinated? Who's doing the plantation activities? And what are the socio-ecological outcomes? Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, great presentation. Could I ask, have you looked at, or has the program alluded to the temporal aspect of how long do they think they'll keep putting money into this program? How do they plan to put money so that maintenance keeps?
So the program has a 5-year, you get money into the local office of the forest bureaucracy for 5 years to monitor the program. I think certain types of plantations get 10 years, but no, nothing after that, which is interesting because nobody really cares about what happens to these sites after 10 years.
Thank you. Thanks for such an interesting, I love your framework actually, by the way, so thank you for presenting that. I'm wondering about the chances and opportunities that the communities who are involved in these projects have for shaping them and adapting them to their own needs and their own vision for their forest.
So you asked what communities have?
Yeah.
This
What
program,
spaces they
yeah,
have.
so officially there is no role for communities' participation in this. It's the local government official who has to propose what activities have to go on. I even asked a lot of them, do you get inputs from the villagers about what trees to plant? But again, because there's so many trees to be planted, it really doesn't matter. You have to rely on what's in the nursery already. So, and then there are some places where you see some interesting relationships with villages who have some access to these forested, to the plantations for some non-timber forest products. But that also happens only after 3 or 4 years because they're worried about the grazing activity that might bring in, and that would kill the saplings, which it would. So there is an interesting relationship. Some places where the timber is eventually going to be harvested, like in West Bengal, there is certain hope. These programs are not that old enough that you'd see the trees and see the harvesting opportunities, but there is an expectation that they will eventually be harvested, and communities in these areas where existing relationships are there for joint forest management, they will be split with the community.
Generates maybe a whole government department to initiate these things and employs government employees. Does it create strange, perverse incentives to continue income generation from deforestation in the country in order to have afforestation projects?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Yes, it is not a carbon offset program in its own self. It is a deforestation. So it's kind of like reduced emission for deforestation, where if you are cutting any development project in India, roads, mines are required to get a forest clearance from the government. And in getting that forest clearance permit, they have to pay money for equivalent to the amount of forest they're cutting. Trees they're cutting, not even forests. And so that money goes into the state pool, which is then used to fund this program. So it is from deforestation permits. And yes, it has created a whole agency. It's called Compensatory Forestation Management Authority, which was formed in 2016, although it existed in an ad hoc way before. And you're an interesting question. I don't have a proper answer to that, but yes, the agency only exists because deforestation is happening. And so some people, bureaucrats even, people who are quite ecologically minded in the government would say that this is blood money, that it's money to support afforestation from deforestation. Thank you. And the next speaker, I'll have introduced Stefano Silveira from the University of San Paulo and Groningen. His presentation is on the assessment of the introduction of jurisdictional RED Plus programs in the Brazilian regulated market.
Hello, everyone. So, hi, I'm Stefano. I'm so happy that you already introduced the RED Plus. It's gonna save us some time. So, I'm from the São Paulo University and vice researcher of the Groningen University. I'm here to talk with you about some legal issues. So, basically about the introduction of jurisdictional RED Plus in programs in the Brazilian ETS, the Brazilian Emission Trading System. That's how I'm going to call in this presentation. So you can know, here's an overview of what I'm showing here today. But basically, I want to talk to you about the challenges we have to introduce this kind of offsettings in this new regulated market. So, for that, you should know that we are in the process of approving our own emissions trading system. So, Brazil is doing this right now. It's in the Congress right now. I'm going to explain better how it's going. But basically, we already have some voluntary carbon market from the 2006. We have the jurisdictional RED Plus market since 2010, and we still did not have this regulated carbon market in Brazil. So here is the introduction with objective to analyze the feasibility of assessing jurisdictional RED Plus programs within the new regulated markets. Use qualitative, bibliographical, and documentary research. And the research question, it's really close to the objective. So I really want to show you the complexities and ambiguities of our recent legislative frameworks. So, it's right. So first of all, just to talk a little bit about our voluntary carbon markets. From the last years, we had some trouble with that because there was many cases of harassment of communities, of traditional communities, and we have a specific case of in a city called Portel in Pará, where you had at least 3 projects overlapping, state public forest years, and also the local communities did not have clear benefits or didn't have benefits at all. So the thing is, we had a huge the voluntary carbon market in Amazon. Many enterprises just started losing their credibility. Also, the certifiers they used some methodologies that would not actually prove that the people that were selling those carbon credits actually had this land. Anyway, it was a mess. So some people from the state governors and some policymakers started making the jurisdictional RED Plus. So just to explain to you, it's really hard. It's the legislative process in Brazil that's headed to what we have today. So we almost have an ETS, Brazilian ETS. Here is where it begins. The national climate change policy. It already has some forecasts of the Brazilian markets. And then here we had a huge political crisis, and it just became really, but many proposal bills here, but none of them became something. Here, the executive, with the leadership of the Ministry of Economics, sent to the Senate some drafts. The Senate approves this bill. It goes to the how do you say, the House of Deputies. Then the House of Deputies incorporates a lot of other bills, and then changes the number, it goes back to Senate, and we are here. So yesterday we were supposed to have these votes, but we didn't. It was postponed once more. But right now we're expecting to have that until this COP of Baku, but if not until COP 30 that is in Belém, it is in Brazil. So basically what we have here is a political clash between the two houses, and that's is hard there in the process. And also there's a movement from the northern governors, from the what we call the legal Amazon, to change also this project, because they say that it's more favorable to the union, and the states are losing a little bit of control of the REDD+ initiatives. So now talking about finally the jurisdictional REDD+ model. So this model has a higher scale. So it makes, for example, you can delimitate the state or province, and the projects that are made inside this, you can have it helps you not to have the leakage. It's very different from the REDD+, the REDD+ only project that's it's from isolated and specific places. So in the practice, that's how it works. So those are the states of the so-called legal Amazon. We also have Maranhão here, but all of those states has their own jurisdictional REDD+ programs. I took 3 of them to talk about them to you, so to see how it works in the practice. So Acre, the state here, it was the first jurisdictional REDD+ in Brazil. It began in 2010. Their model is focused on payments for environmental service, and it encourages sustainable development at farmers, indigenous communities, and extractivists. Mato Grosso, they have some programs that target conservation. It's focused on command and control and the development of low carbon economy, and they are aiming the generation of 6 tons carbon reduced by 2030. And finally, Pará. So Pará is held in the COP next year. It has the Amazon Agora state plan, and it's focused on deforestation, degradation, reduction of emission. So that's something that's happened right now on the New York Climate Week. The Pará just have the Amazon and the Leaf Coalition. They just bought this amount of carbon credits from jurisdiction REDD+ from Pará, and it was the biggest we ever had. Walmart and the Amazon company were involved in this, and but at the same time we have this problem here, and I'll show you the problem, the advantage and disadvantage of this approach. So you have a letter written by many indigenous leaders that they were not rightly considered about this Leaf Coalition deal. So that's one of the biggest problems you find, because it's really hard to have a coordination with the parts of the government to manage the interests of so many stakeholders, to have the right way to talk with the communities. So I'm gonna talk about 2 of the advantages just because we don't have much time. But first of all, reduced leakage, like I said. So it's those projects, they cover a wider range of territorial areas. So it facilitates the monitoring, and as it's with the state government, it helps not have a leakage, just like the Red Plus normal projects. And also, you have a greater capacity to expand its impacts with community remuneration. At the Red Plus projects, the specific Red Plus projects, you usually, when a community, you don't have the additionality, it's not possible to remunerate them. So since here you have a larger range of action, that they can have the payments. So finally, of disadvantage, you have the question of the issue of lack of autonomy. So we have a lot of deforestation that comes from mining and some oil activities. It is all regulated by government. Just like I said, the free, prior, and informative consents. And finally, I think that's it because we're running out of time. So, conclusion. While the jurisdictional Red Plus model presents innovative methods for emission reduction, it faces significant complexities that may not align well with Brazilian regulated carbon market framework. So, just like I said, we had many proposals of bills. Some of them included these markets ultimately. The last one, it's better writing, but the thing is that it's always a matter of building and strong governance. So it's really important to recognize the role of the states on this process, but at the same time we need to have a strong and well-built framework to the national legislation. So, for example, analyzing the last bill at Article 42, the conversion of voluntary credits into the new market credits is going to be limited to methodologies accredited by ETS. So that seems to me like a right decision because we need this framework. Like I showed you have all those states, so you can't have a methodology for each of them. But at the same time, there Article 43, we have the advanced sale of jurisdictional carbon credits for future periods with justification of avoiding double counting on properties under concession is it's impossible. So it's some limitation that they wrote about the states methodologies, the way the states do the Red Plus, and anyway, with governance we really need to have halfway. So here's my main references, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. We have about 5 minutes for your hard-hitting questions, so just raise your hand. Back.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I have a very practical question. You mentioned that the benefit sharing in jurisdictional RED is more equal because basically, well, I assume because communities can also participate where, like from places where there is no potential for additionality. So my question is, how does benefit sharing work for these type of jurisdictional RED projects or initiatives?
Yeah, so it was really hard to put everything into a 12-minute presentation, but that's part of the governance as well. So that's some important thing that's it got to be really clear. So how it's going to be redistributed, how it's going to be, how it's going to work. So each state has its own framework, and we should unify that, right? But that's one of the biggest challenges right now.
Further questions?
Yeah, I'm just curious when you get down to the pricing. So you have these companies buying credits, and that means that they're not decarbonizing their own supply chain are reducing their emissions because they're purchasing these credits. And so you're pricing them at kind of mitigation prices today, but when we look at models of where climate impacts are really going to hit home, it's mostly in the global south. So shouldn't we be pricing them at future adaptation prices, not at current mitigation prices? Otherwise, like, you guys are, it's just going to be set up for failure in the future. And I think it's very, very concerning. Where's the dialogue on that?
Well, I think that's a critic that we already have with the REDD Plus for years, and in fact, those companies, they are the big difference that we have of the REDD Plus jurisdictional, that it's directly applied to some programs that are inside those states, that those states make, for example, so of reforestation. So Mato Grosso has the program for the changing the economy, at least in the paper. That's what's right. So what's been written. So theoretically, they are financing programs that, in fact, are gonna change something. But at the same time, I think that's the important intersection with the Brazilian ETS, because we got to talk about cap and trade. We got to talk about a ceiling, right? But that's also a challenge, and I understand that this critic over the REDD Plus program, even more with big companies. But what is happening is those big companies that used to invest on REDD Plus projects, for example, the Portel one that had many big companies, they're starting to invest to those state programs because it seems more feasible and you have the state control. But yeah, at the same time, we go to the same problem, right? But yeah.
There was a hand up here. We can have a last question.
Thank you so much. Very useful presentation. I do think it might be helpful to mention that the LEAF Coalition members are required to sign up to the SBTI. So it's not just kind of wholesale offsetting like other companies do. I'm just wondering if you might be able to share with us what you think how you think it's going to play out in this legislation, the whole projects versus jurisdictional question. I think something from our organization that is frustrating in a lot of these conversations is that there's not a whole lot of understanding of what projects or jurisdictional programs actually do besides the money. We do think that's kind of important when thinking about the types of governance reforms that are going to be necessary to keep forests standing. So if you have thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Can you repeat again? Sorry. just the question.
How do you think the competition between projects and jurisdictional REDD is going to play out in the new legislation?
All right. Thank you. Well, from what you have of the new legislation that is going to be voted like next Tuesday, they seem to limitate a lot of this power of the REDD Plus projects. And the truth is that if you select the investments and the single projects, they are going down after all the things we have the certifiers last year. So I think that and that's my opinion. This last bill is going to be reformed to take some interest of those states, because we just have a municipal election right now, and the executive is losing a little bit of power of trading. But at the same time, about the crisis of those projects, those former REDD Plus projects, I think that they're going to reinvent themselves, but I'm not sure if they will keep the quantity of selling that they used to have. But I see that this bill right now, they are considering both of the voluntary and the regulated, but they really want to make another regulation specifically to talk about voluntary, because when it went to the House of the Deputies, they just mixed it all up. So I think this one is mentioning the offsets of the voluntary, but it seems that they are going to create another one. Okay.
Thank you very much. We're at time. Round of applause. We had like 4 or 5 other speakers who cancelled, so it's glad that everyone turned up here. We didn't miss them so much. Thank you to the technical staff as well. Have a good rest of your conference.